What's up, guys? I'm going to make a short little video on a topic that doesn't get a lot of attention. Shout out to Mind Unveiled in the original Tartarian Truth type channels. If you don't know what Tartaria is, don't worry about that at all. This is going to be a good little video and a quickie for you to understand something that doesn't get a lot of attention. That YouTube channel, Mind Unveiled, I'll give them a shout out right now. And there are a few others. Forgive me for not thinking of you right off the top of my head, but they're the ones that opened my mind to it. They have a phenomenal video on this with tons of pictures, slideshow videos, and just they go way more into depth than me on a whiteboard. But I want to do it for my friends and my peers and my family so they know what I'm up to and they know all these little things so I don't sound like a crazy guy when you run into me. All right, so airships. We think that airships have been kept from our historical narrative, and here's why. The Hindenburg was a really popular one. If you know anything about the Hindenburg going down, I think that the Hindenburg was what was staged to go down and explode, so it was too dangerous, so we couldn't do this anymore. I think U.S. Standard Oil couldn't make a lot of money off of Zeppelins, couldn't make a lot of money off of air travel, blimps. They could hold tons of people and took very little fuel to propel themselves. So the Hindenburg goes down, and if you know anything about the Hindenburg, there was like 22 film crews ready to go, rocking right there to get all this. The propaganda's pumped out. It was very propaganda-like. If you know anything about mass shootings that I used to debunk, or just weird things about propaganda from the Boston bombing, when you have fake interviews and things like that, all these mass shootings that have fake interviews afterwards, Civil War photos that are completely staged and obviously staged that you can tell as an adult, you know, in this century, realizing, wait a second, that's a dumb photo. Why? They're actors. These guys didn't just get done fighting a war. That's fake. You look in the background, there's so many clues and so many photos. What I'm getting at is the Hindenburg going down, I think, was an intentionally designed situation so we could no longer have cheap air travel for the common man. U.S. Standard Oil couldn't make a lot of money doing that. And so let's think about vanilla skies and Photoshop. What do I mean by vanilla skies? If you look at a lot of these photos from the 1800s, and when I say a lot of them, they tell you that the exposure is why the skies are all whited out. But if you see a freaking button on a guy's shirt from 100 yards away, you can see a shadow from the button on a shirt 100 yards away. It's bullshit. Mind Unveiled, once again, shout out to them. They have the best early 1800s Photoshop video I've ever seen on all of the internet. It is so good. Oh my gosh, it's so good. These companies, these people used to, I forget their names, but they would do layering and you could actually pay for Photoshop in the early 1800s. Not to mention, photography was around a lot earlier than we're told as well. There's plenty of videos out on that. That's not even arguable anymore. But with that said, if you think about your school curriculums, you're going to get these books and you're going to understand, you know, what technologies were at one time frames because of what you see and learned in your books and what you're quizzed on and what you're indoctrinated with. Well, if the skies were all vanilla, whited out, and you couldn't see any airships, you never thought about that. And you never thought about places like the Pennsylvania train station and how massive that building is. We're going to get to that. So just know, look at all these photos from the 1800s and understand that there's a ton of Photoshop that we are catching and finding and realizing and seeing just by looking that were presented to us as real, that were completely fake photos, especially in the Civil War times. So I think there was airships. I think airships were using direct energy weapons. I think there was intentional man-made earthquakes and the ground liquefied. There was liquefaction for the mud flood, things like that. I think there was multiple different man-made attacks, nuclear in specific locations. There's evidence of all this stuff. But yes, there was an attack all over the world to basically a historical reset, to rewrite history. And the ones acquiring all these old world buildings, they rewrote the history. They were the reset. They were all about the reset. And so look at the World's Fairs. You're going to start seeing stuff like this at the World's Fairs. And so let's keep moving. What did this have in it? So if you had the Hindenburg, helium is not flammable. Hydrogen is very flammable. So the U.S. wouldn't let them put helium in those balloons. Why? I don't know. Maybe because it worked too well. So the hydrogen blew up. It was dangerous. So maybe the U.S. didn't want anybody to use helium because it would be perfectly fine and safe, and it couldn't be proven to be dangerous. So we got rid of this because of hydrogen, but we weren't allowed to fill it up with helium for whatever reason. I wonder why. Maybe because it's not flammable and it's safe, and it could float along electrostatically phenomenally. If you want to know what electrostatics is, the ground is a negative charge and you have an electrostatic gradient. You know, you have amps and volts. It goes up, and the higher you go, you get more of a positive charge all the way up to the ionosphere, which is a very powerful part of your atmosphere. A ton of energy there. So, if you understand the electrostatic gradient, you would understand what would happen if this was filled with hydrogen or helium, how you could get to a specific location in the atmosphere, close to the ionosphere, and you could basically stick to it magnetically if you understand how electrostatics work and cruise along with like no thrust. That means like no fuel. That means you could carry a crap ton of people, which they did. There's endless early 1800s and even probably earlier airship like, what do they call them? Not just templates, they're blueprints that I've looked at. And these things were full of people, filled with people, cheap air travel for the common man. U.S. Standard Oil can't make a lot of money on it, so they're going to get rid of it. How do we get rid of it? The Hindenburg goes down. We have 22 photography companies ready there, cameramen ready there, getting all the pictures. Propaganda comes out, and now it's too dangerous, gone forever. The common man can't travel via blimps or zeppelins or what have you. So, how does the Prohibition tie into this? It's going to help you understand how they rewrite history and trick you into thinking certain things. The Prohibition before the World War was not about temperance. That word just makes me laugh when I see that, when it's like, what was the Prohibition about? The Prohibition was about people with land grants and land patents, real people, we the people, you know, free American people, not citizens, American people that owned large tracts of land. And it was private property. It wasn't real estate. So it was their private property, and they could grow grains on it. When they would grow grains on it, they could use that as their own fuel source. If you watch the movie Lawless with Shia LaBeouf, it's always kind of right in your face. I've done this. I've ran little motorcycle motors on shine before. If you have your own grain alcohols, you can convert your motors to run just fine, sometimes better and cleaner with simple conversions on your grain alcohols. So that's what the Prohibition was really about. They wanted you to get your butt kicked in the Depression. They didn't want you to have your own land, your own food, and your own fuel source. You don't need government. You're self-sufficient. That's what the Prohibition was really about. It was not about temperance. Get out of my face with that crap. That's just stupid. Okay, I also wrote down jurisdiction. Moving on. U.S. Standard Oil can't make money off that. U.S. Standard Oil does not want you to have your own fuel source on your land. Jurisdiction. Think about jurisdiction. I look at law still as land, air, and water, an acronym for jurisdictions. Well, back then, before the corporation of the United States and these incorporated crap fraudulent systems where they lie to the people, jurisdiction was completely different, probably of the air. Just like you have open water jurisdictions. You know, once you get out in that open sea, it's a different ball game. You know, you got pirates and stuff you got to worry about, but air travel, maybe you have more freedom. You know, I don't know what the jurisdiction or laws were like back then. You know, maybe we should look into it and see what it was like for air travel. But I think that plays a huge role, because right now, what's my problem? If I go out on those roads, you know, I can't play the postal roll game, travel free, you know, travel freely in my private capacity from point A to point B. The police are good. The Gestapo's going to stop you if you don't have a tag, and they're just going to stuff and cuff you, even though they don't know the law, because they're just doing their job. I'm not mad at them, and you know, they're probably not mad at you. They're probably annoyed with you, but if you try to do that crap. But what I'm saying is, air travel could have been a phenomenal way to avoid jurisdiction, you know, for companies, entities, groups, and to not really get in trouble, and to do it inexpensively. Pennsylvania train station, why did I write that down? So if you've looked up these old photos of like the Pennsylvania train station, some of these other massive mega stations, when I say mega, I'm talking 100 feet to this dome in this Pennsylvania train station. And then you have a train coming through that's like 12 feet high. So you have this massive 100-foot arch, right, station, huge, absolutely ridiculous. Look at the photos, look them up right now. And then you have this tiny little train coming through. Hello, the blimps used to go through there. Look at the old World's Fairs. These blimps were inside those massive 100-plus foot tall mega structures. They were inside them, all right? These used to go through those stations and load and offload people. So look at the Pennsylvania train station. Just really look at the picture of the little itty-bitty train going through at the bottom. Think, did they build this thing for that train? Exactly. Thank you. So what is this little drawing I have here? That's a lighthouse. I think we've been lied to about lighthouses. I think lighthouses, yes, I'm sure they were great for light so you don't run into the rocks with your ships. Way to go, cool. I think that's a great idea. You could have just had a light on your ship. But say you have a lighthouse, I think they were refill stations for Zeppelins and just mooring docking stations. Obviously, they had stairwells that went all the way down. Obviously, you could dock off, because I've seen the gates on some of the railings on the old lighthouses that haven't even been changed yet. So not only could you hook up and hover and stay there, maybe you could refill. My grandfather used to work in one of these, and the way he explained it, it makes a lot more sense to me that it was a refill station and a mooring station as opposed to just a lookout light station. You know, that doesn't make as much sense to me as this does, especially when you pull up the photos. And there's more and more of them coming out now because people are digging in the archives and people are undoing all of this BS narrative that we got in our indoctrination camps as good little citizens. You know, our Rockefeller-funded public school education indoctrination camps. So, for lack of a better word, I have Tartarian time period. So let's just think of this Tartarian time period. If you don't know what Tartaria is, or the Tartarian time period, please don't go out there and get propagandized. There's a crap ton of damage control and propaganda on this word and this word. Mud flood and Tartaria are getting massive damage control and propaganda. You're probably going to see crap. You got to go to one of the earlier channels. And so there's some really good stuff. John Levi, Mind Unveiled, you know, Paul Cook, all those guys. Art of Dino, Old Scary World. Old World Florida is a new guy into the game. I love these guys. I love Good Line TV, has phenomenal little clips and stuff on his Instagrams and channels. And then he comes out with series. It's like, come on, guys, let's step it up. But Tartarian air travel, I think, was a thing. And I think it's been kept from us. So we don't really know. Why do I have cartography? Bingo. Cartography, 100%. When you see these maps from like the 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, whatever, I mean, these maps are freaking perfect. When I think about trying to map a land and I think about technologies not having LiDAR, not having radar, how are they really mapping all this stuff, horse and buggy, like we've been told this time frame was like you had Sacagawea and Lewis and Clark, you know, walking around. You've got Indians, Native Americans, just these primitive Indians. Yeah, right. You know, start looking at Old World Florida, you're gonna see some cool stuff. And then, like, all of a sudden we have these insanely elaborate and exotic, perfect maps that are so perfect to the T. There's some of them are still perfect till this day. No, I think they were in blimps. I think they had air travel, and I think that's been just kind of part of the historical narrative that's been removed from our minds. And I think this was huge for cartography and map making always. And I definitely think these were used for the last reset, whether it was direct energy weapons, dropping bombs, nukes, things like that. I absolutely 100% see orientations. Like the Carolina Bays, for example. You see these massive, in Carolina Bays, they're these bays that are angled towards Lake Michigan. And when I say, look them up, Carolina Bays, and it's almost like it was like like there was bombs dropped. Look at it. It aims towards Lake Michigan. And there's also aimed towards Lake Michigan from Nebraska. They're out in Nebraska too. They're all over the world. They're in Russia. They're in Australia. I can get on Google Earth and find these Carolina Bays all over the world, and they always have a different explanation for what they are. It was some sort of attack. I don't think it was comets, because I don't believe in outer space like that. I think it was a man-made type of attack from technologies that they removed from history and historical narratives and kept out of our brains, indoctrinated out of us. And so, remember, lighthouses, probably not what we thought they are. Air travel was a thing. It's not just about the tunnels. It's not just about the deep underground military bases. It's not just about the surface level. I think it's also about the air. Don't forget how important that air really is, because now we have Starlink and SpaceX and all that stuff, you know, replacing the NASA lies of all these years. And it's like, man, maybe we should really start looking into the air and the skies and all the way up to our firmament. Who's really in control? Think Hunger Games, things like that. All right, that's my air rant. So let me know what you think. Peace.